Plato's Republic. We will be jumping into Book 1. I will be talking about the first half of Book 1, or maybe a little more than the first half, maybe about the first 2/3 or so. I'll begin by introducing you to the characters of the book. Once again, if you recall from the last podcast, there's a drama to Plato's dialogues, which is what I mean by that is there is a sense of development. There's a plot. There's a scene that's being set, and it's important to keep all that in mind. Even the characters, the names of the characters, is indicative of various concepts, theses that they espouse. So you could think of various characters being the manifestation or the incarnation of certain concepts or ideas, and their names, for example, Glaucon or Thrasymachus, their names, are allusions to the themes that they represent, the concepts that they represent. So we'll begin by looking at the characters, and then we'll just push through the first half, looking at various points that are made in the discussion. And I won't be touching on everything. So if you do have questions about anything in Plato's Republic, but especially from the particular reading for the particular podcast, please send me an email. I'm happy to answer questions even on the next podcast at the very beginning or so. So please raise questions through email, and I'm happy to respond to that. Okay, so jumping in, the Republic, as I mentioned last time, is actually a recollection of Socrates, of a conversation that he had the previous day. And this is a conversation that occurred at Polemarchus's house. As you read, the Republic begins with Socrates going down, making a descent to the Piraeus to sort of do two things: to see, but also to pray. So there's this, I'll automatically kind of get this tension between wanting to observe, which kind of seems like kind of this almost this prideful thing. You're wanting to just see what's happening, kind of like a nosy Socrates, just wanting to see how people attempt piety. But then also there's this attempt to be pious himself in his descent and his going down. So one of the things that we've mentioned that's going to come up throughout the whole dialogue is these opposites kind of coming together in a way that unify them. So it's things that seem many, or things that seem opposed, things that seem different, coming together into a type of harmony or a type of unity. And in fact, as we'll see down the road, that's just what the virtue of justice enacts, or that's what the virtue of justice brings about, namely the unification, the harmonizing of things that on the surface seem separate, seem opposed, seem contrary. But what justice is it's the virtue of harmonizing that, bringing that into a complete whole. So you can think about doing justice as bringing opposites into a whole. Okay, so let's begin just a little bit with the characters. So first of all, the first main character to speak is Socrates. I mentioned a bit last time about Socrates, so I won't say much about him. Polemarchus is the house at which Polemarchus' house is the house at which this conversation occurs. And his name, which is important to keep in mind, means roughly something like warlord, or something like a combatant, like general, something along those lines. And so what you get is this notion of power, force, even skirting on violence, right? So it's no surprise that at the beginning, Polemarchus is demanding that Socrates stay, and he's the one that says we can force you to stay because we, the many, are more powerful than you, the one. So right off the bat, through the introduction of the characters and the scene, you're getting this this broader narrative, this broader drama between the relation of the many to the one. The many can overpower the one, which seems to be what Polemarchus is proposing, or is not so much proposing in word, but in deed. Okay, and so Polemarchus is the son of Cephalus, who is a wealthy business owner. He's elderly, and one of the things that we see throughout the discussion between Socrates and Cephalus is that what Cephalus sort of seemingly represents is that there's wisdom in old age, and Socrates admits this. He agrees, he consents that there is wisdom in old age. But one of the things that I think comes out is that Cephalus doesn't quite understand what that really means, or doesn't understand why old age accompanies wisdom. Because he says some things that might seem right, and in a sense they are right, but they kind of still nevertheless miss the real heart of the matter. Okay, so keeping in mind that Cephalus is elderly and wealthy. Okay, he's the father of Polemarchus. The next speaker that we see in book one, and we'll see this becomes one of the main speakers throughout the whole dialogue, is Glaucon, and Glaucon is the half brother of Plato, and one of the interesting things about Glaucon is he was the one that accompanies Socrates in the journey down from Athens to the Piraeus to view this festival to the goddess Bendis. And so Glaucon is sort of like this guide, or this accompaniment to Socrates. And Glaucon, if you think of sort of the etymology of that, maybe you've heard of glaucoma, or you got these different references or sort of roots which refer to the eye. And so the name Glaucon just so happens to mean something like keen-sighted or sharp-eyed or sharp-sighted, something along those lines. And so one of the things that Glaucon's going to represent is this ability, like we saw last time, to examine. And what Glaucon does is he, in book two, more so than in book one, but Glaucon is going to be this really sharp critic, in a way, of Socrates, but not because he is opposed to Socrates, not because he sees Socrates as an enemy, but because he wants to see Socrates keenly or sharply or accurately. And so he's not going to let anything go by without adequate examination, which is what you would want of a friend if you were actually looking to understand things. You wouldn't want them to know, or put it in this way, the situation, you're speaking and you tell your friend, if I say something that doesn't make sense, please let me know, because I probably overlooked something important that I need to clarify. And so then the friend points out all of your errors, not to make fun of you or not to belittle you, or not to try to prove themselves better, but to actually better you. And this is a common theme. This is basically what coaches do, right? They point out all the failures of their players, not to say, oh, you're so bad at this sport, but to actually draw them into the light so that they become things that are known and examined so that they can be fixed. So Glaucon is this character who's going to be like the examiner, and so he might seem like an enemy, but it's not actually the case that he's in opposition or he's opposed to Socrates. Okay, along those same lines, you have Adeimantus, who is also the half-brother of Plato, and so that means that Glaucon and Adeimantus are themselves brothers. Okay, one of the things that I should also mention is that Plato, who is the actual author of this book, he's the guy that wrote the book, he doesn't appear as characters in any of the dialogues that he writes about Socrates, which is interesting, so that he never uses himself as one of the characters. There's only one time that, I believe one time, there might be another I'm thinking about it, but there's one time that I know for a fact that Plato is referred to, and that's in the Phaedo, and the Phaedo is the dialogue where Socrates is put to death, where he drinks the hemlock. It's kind of the death scene, the death conversation of Socrates. And Plato makes reference to, here's all the people that were here at Socrates' death, and he gives this list. And then he says, oh, and by the way, Plato wasn't able to be there because he was ill. And so it's an interesting thing that he deliberately is going out of his way to point out that I was not part of this conversation. There's various reasons why that might be. We won't get into it now, but if you want to talk about that, feel free to send me an email. We can talk about why Plato would want to distance himself from the drama of the dialogue. I think I have interpretations of that, but I don't want to drag you through that right now. So, okay, and then the last character that we need to get on the page right now, before we jump into the meat of Book 1, is Thrasymachus. And the thing to know about Thrasymachus is that he is a sophist. He's a teacher of sophistry, of rhetoric. He's like a professional rhetorician. So he is the master of argument, the master of speeches. So he has this this job, which is to go around instructing people on how to speak such that they can persuade other people about whatever they want to persuade them about. So the sophist doesn't actually study medicine. The sophist doesn't actually study politics. Instead, they study, call it the structure of speeches, and that sort of dovetails with the audience of speeches, so that whether you're speaking about politics or whether you're speaking about medicine or whether you're speaking about the Kansas City Chiefs, you can be persuasive, or not. You can sound persuasive, and therefore you can persuade other people, even though you don't know anything really about politics, or you don't know anything really about the Kansas City Chiefs. You can persuade people as long as you have a certain amount of skill or tact in how to develop that. A standard kind of contemporary example of sophistry might be something like, instead of thinking of speeches, it's probably better to think within the context of like advertising, where what an advertisement does is it entices you and entices your passions to make choices, to think a certain way, and you find yourself thinking in that way because of, say, certain advertisements, and you don't really know why. You don't understand why you now suddenly like this product, this shampoo. You're not sure why you feel more compelled to buy this shampoo over the other shampoo that are on offer, and it might turn out that upon examination, you can't really track down any good reason for that, which means that your preferences, your beliefs, your desires are completely unhinged from your reasons. Another name for reason in Greek is logos. So it's like saying you have preferences, beliefs, desires that are not logical or that are not aimed at a logos is sort of the technical way of putting it. There's not a reason for why you desire this. Instead, what has happened is some pretty crafty things have occurred, which have enticed you, elicited your emotions, your desires, and this is a really complicated question or a complicated issue of how this happens. It involves looking into sociology and into psychology to understand why humans change their desires and think, no, I need to wear the striped shirt with red and blue and not the striped shirt with purple and black. Why do we desire the one and not the other? Whereas the year before we thought the reverse was actually the cool thing to do, and now we don't. How did that shift occur? It becomes a very complicated question that likely has nothing to do with you, but with what other people wanted you to think. And so what the sophist is the person who has this power to control what people think or what people desire. So if you want to convince someone of something, you develop a speech which can persuade everyone, or at least the masses. And so in that case, the sophist can be seen as someone who has great authority or great power over everyone. And this is why the sophist is seen as kind of this power figure, this authority figure. They were very highly sought after. People wanted to study with sophists, with rhetoricians. In fact, this is not something just unique to Plato's time, but it even pushes on into the into the later Roman Empire. Many great Roman orators were masters of rhetoric, and St. Augustine's Confessions even talks about how he was a student of rhetoric, where he mastered this, and he has this critique. Interestingly, I forget what book of the Confessions this is, but he says, "My teachers would praise me for these wonderful speeches that I would be able to construct, but they were not praising the content of the speeches, because the content of the speeches were so horrible. They were so immoral, so bad. It was all this praise of violence towards innocent people and revenge. And he has this great critique of what he used to do as a rhetorician, because it was completely uprooted from what was actually good. And so Thrasymachus, going back to the Republic, is a sophist, and he is going to probably be the main interlocutor, the main conversant with Socrates in Book 1. And his name means something like fierce fighter. He's sort of like a hot-headed figure who is very confident in what he says and very confident in always winning the argument. And it's also important to keep in mind that he sees conversation as like battle. So conversation is always about who's going to win, or an argument is always about how can I beat this person, and you beat them by getting them to think the way you do. It's completely foreign to Thrasymachus that he would succeed or win an argument by having his own beliefs changed. that's just a completely foreign option for Thrasymachus, because the way he conceives of dialogue, the way he conceives of speech, is to try to get this person to think the way I do. The question about do I actually think correctly is not one that Thrasymachus or the sophists entertain, right? So that's something that which is, I think, very significant, very important to keep in mind. And so as Socrates converses with Thrasymachus and starts to get Thrasymachus to understand, or start to get Thrasymachus to see, maybe I don't actually believe what I said I believed. Once that starts to occur, Thrasymachus gets really annoyed and kind of shuts down, and then immediately says, Socrates, you're just trying to, belittle me. And so he immediately thinks that what Socrates is doing is just trying to win the argument. Right? So once again, he responds to this by just going back on the offensive. He doesn't actually give up his beliefs, which is a good life lesson, I think. Conversations aren't always combative. Even arguments aren't combative, or they shouldn't be. You shouldn't argue with someone simply to get them to believe the way you do. That could often lead to you getting more solidified in your own errors. And this is one of the themes that we're going to see in Book 1. So let's jump into what I'll call the meat of Book 1. Okay, so it begins with Socrates being held, and he's being held by power. And so you have right up front this discussion of who is the strongest here, who is the ruler, who has power over whom, and the question of power or authority is the question of politics. It's the question of political order. Where does political power come from? How does it come about in a just way? If a bunch of people just say, this is the way everyone should live, why should everyone believe them? One reason why everyone should believe them, if they say that, is because they might return by saying, because if you don't do it, we're going to kill you all, or we're going to enslave all of you. That would be a good reason, perhaps, to say, okay, we'll do what you want. But you recognize that the source of that type of authority is in the fact that you think that they are more powerful than you are, right? So one way of thinking of the issue at hand in the Republic is that it's about authority. It's about power or control. Where does it originate? How does it originate? Why does it originate? Can we be wrong about who actually has authority? Can we be wrong about who actually has power? Is it good to have power? Sometimes what power means is not what we think it means. So we might actually say, this person is powerful, but upon examination we realize that their strength is actually what completely undermines them. An example we'll be using over and over again has to do with the passions. So if you think the person who can, get as much alcohol as they want whenever they want, if their passions are such that they just desire it, they just constantly want to drink it, then what's going to happen is it seems like, yeah, they're living the high life. They have whatever they want. Everything they want is at their disposal, right? Unlimited supply of McCormick's gin. And it turns out that, which probably would not be the high life, but it turns out that what that would do, it looks like they become their own master because they have everything they could ever want. But what that does, the consequence of that type of lifestyle, is that they actually enslave themselves. They become a slave to their own passions, and so their strength screws them over. Their strength is what causes their great downfall, and it's what makes them thereby weak. And we call these people addicts because of the fact that they had lost control over themselves. And the reason they lost control over themselves is because they thought they had so much freedom. They thought they could do whatever they want, and which is to say, they thought they had so much power. They thought they had so much control, but that's what was the exact cause of their demise. Okay, so that's one way to think of the theme of Book 1 is it's this question of power and how it relates to the well-being of the individual human, but also the well-being of society as a whole. And so what you have is Socrates being forced to stay and being forced to say what he thinks justice or virtue is. Okay, and one of the things to see is that we get at least 3 proposals from different characters in Book 1 about what strength, or what it is to be stronger, or what it is to be a ruler. You begin with what I've already talked about is the majority. It looks like the majority can be the ruler because the majority are stronger than the few. The many are stronger than the few. If there's 15 people and there's only 15 people on one side and only 2 people on the other, the 15 are obviously stronger than the 2, and the 15 can make the 2 people do whatever they want. Okay, so there's one sense of framing this and thinking that it's the majority that rule. It's the majority that have power, and therefore it's the majority that have authority. And what we'll see down the road is this type of rule, this type of politics is what is known as for Plato as democracy. It's that the majority rule, right? So the what is considered a just law is whatever the majority agree on to be just, right? So the majority come and make a decision, and that's what constitutes whether it's a good decision or not, is whether the majority, like the force of the majority, stands behind that. And if that's the case, then the few who voted against that, they get outnumbered, and they have to, or they're forced to now change their views and conform to what the majority said. Okay, so that's, at the very least, that's the first introduction of what strength would mean. Okay, the second is old age. This is made clear in the character of Cephalus, who is old, and he thinks that there's a type of, as we mentioned earlier, a type of wisdom in being old, and therefore there's a type of control. The things that would cause us to sway off track, off the mark, cause us to lose sight of the purpose of life, which is, as he sort of alludes to in a somewhat humorous way, is things that calm down in old age. So the desire for fancy banquets and the desire for fancy drinks and fancy women sort of move to the back burner as you get older, and he thinks that this is indicative that the elderly have a type of authority because of the fact that they're more in control of themselves. So they know more about what control looks like, is because these other things don't have power over them. But what you get in this conversation at this stage in the dialogue is you get Socrates pointing out that's not exactly the case. It's not simply old age that makes people no longer want to party. Um, Old age prevents you from actually partying, right? But old age doesn't take away necessarily the desire for that. Think of an example like the person who like is a I know a college athlete who spends much of his or her time playing a sport, and then they graduate college, they get a job, they move into their late 20s, 30s, 40s, even 50s. But that whole time after college, they're still longing for or dwelling on or desiring even to live the golden days again. I wish that I could get on the field one more time. Now I can't because my knees are busted and my back's busted and my eyesight's gone bad and all, I'm becoming an old man or an old lady and I just can't actually play the sport anymore. But the desire to play the sport still has complete control over them. And this is something I think is really prevalent. It's really common in our culture. Given the emphasis we have on sport, it becomes one of the, sad to say, one of the highest goods of human life. I think in America, most people live and die for, playing a particular sport. Now, not everyone would say that. Most people would probably say something like, no, I live and die for God. But when it comes to the actual practice and the way that they actually desire and think, their desires aren't actually, for praying and going to church and any of that stuff. Their desires deep down are actually for playing that sport. So there's sort of disingenuousness about a lot of people in that they don't fully understand themselves and the fact that what they identify as their highest good or their greatest good, or which is to say the thing they most desire. Even when you can't have it because you're old, it doesn't mean you don't still desire it, right? So this is the point that Socrates is making, is that it's not so much that you get old, therefore you don't desire, partying hard. Rather, it's how you live, which is what will make you no longer desire partying hard, right? So the person who loves playing a particular sport, but then comes to see something like, no, I'm not supposed to play this sport anymore. I have to give it up. At a certain point, you're going to have to just let go of the things that you enjoy when you were younger. Just as when you're 10 years old, you love Legos. At a certain point, you're going to have to give that up. You're going to have to stop desiring Legos. Otherwise, you'll never mature. Something similar, I think, can be said about alcohol, about sports, even about sex, that you have to be able to give that up at a certain point in order to mature as a human being. And so what Socrates is saying is that all of these human passions, these human desires, don't go away just because you're old. And therefore they still have control or power over you even when you get old, unless you live a particular way, think a particular way. They're always going to have control over you. And so old age isn't simply the grounds for authority or for rule. And so you can think of this as you have the form of government where it's the long family tradition, the family lineage, the family line, which is something like old age. Think about how far back this family line goes, almost maybe like a monarchy in a particular type of way. But it's about the I don't know, the history of this, that doesn't guarantee that it's like, in control just because it has this long tradition to it. Okay, so the last one I want to look at is the transition from old age to money as the source of like authority. So who's in control? Who has power? Who is like the top dog in society? Is it the majority, like the strong, the brute squad? Is it those that are the elderly, the aged, the wise, or is it as Polemarchus kind of eventually gets to, or is it the people with money, the wealthy? And this is an very interesting discussion, because what you see is those that are wealthy are regarded as powerful, and that's because their desires aren't limited by anything, right? So if you think of it as like, if you have wealth, what limits your choices or even your desires are not there anymore, right? So if you're not wealthy, if you're poor, you don't have the means to satisfy various desires, those desires will just, not always, but largely go away. If you know that it's so unrealistic to buy a Ferrari, there's no real desire. You're not going to spend your day really desiring to buy a Ferrari because you know there was this limit, and so you can't do this. And so you're kind of like, thwarted. Whereas if you have the means, the sky's the limit, so that there's nothing holding you back. And so with the increase in wealth, Plato seems to be suggesting, you get a decrease in limitations on choice, which seems to be thereby an increase in authority or an increase in power. But what Socrates goes on to point out in asking Polemarchus, why, actually I think this is Cephalus at the time, why is money valuable? Why do we really value money? And what Cephalus says is very interesting. It's not actually what I just said just now, but rather what he says is we value money, or he values money, because it prevents him from having to do, or it keeps him, that's probably a better way to put it, it keeps him from having to do injustice. If you have a bunch of money, you don't have to cheat. If you have a bunch of money, you don't have to lie. If you have a bunch of money, you can give freely. You can, be charitable and offer donations for sacrifices and things. And you can do good things when you have a bunch of money, and you don't feel the compulsion to do bad things, right? If you think of the classic Les Mis situation with like Jean Valjean, who steals the bread because he has to live, because he's starving, his family's starving, so he feels like he has to do this act of theft. If you're wealthy, you'll never be in those situations where you feel like you have to lie, or you have to cheat, or you have to steal. And so the real value of wealth, Cephalus says eventually, kind of culminating this whole discussion about power and authority, the real value of money is that it aids justice. And so then this is where you get a transition from power and authority to justice. And justice is probably if you could pick one theme of the Republic, justice is the main theme. What this is a dialogue, what dialogue, or put it this way, what this dialogue is about is justice. And the way that we've arrived at justice, interestingly, is by beginning with power. Okay, so that's important to keep in mind, because what we're going to see is Socrates is going to like turn the tables, and he's going to say, so it turns out that justice, if it's what makes if it's like what makes money valuable, is that you can do good things, just things, moral things, he's then going to ask the question, but why do we care about justice? Why do we care about being moral? Why do we actually care about telling the truth? Or why do we care about not lying or repaying the debts that we make? Why is honesty something that we find valuable or desirable? And what you see upon reading book 1, and as you'll continue into book 2, is what you'll see is that's a really difficult question. To explain why morality or why the virtue of justice is valuable is a very difficult thing to answer, very difficult question to answer. So we're going to see this throughout the next several books of the Republic, is this reflection on what justice is, why is justice valuable, and Thrasymachus is going to be proposing that actually injustice is more valuable than justice. If people could get their way, they would rather be unjust than just. But because people can't get their way, they'll choose justice. So we're gonna get that down the road. But this is where I think you can see why the Republic is going to become this very famous work in ethics, because it has to do with what's the point of morality. We spend so much time thinking about ethics, about making right decisions or avoiding making wrong decisions, talking about what's good, what's bad, what's moral, what's immoral, and that's all within this background of us caring about that or that being valuable. But it's a question that I think is worth asking, which is being asked by Plato. But why do we really think it's valuable? Why do we find that to be an important thing for us? Couldn't you live a happy life and be perfectly immoral? Why would immorality be an impediment to happiness? Okay, so that's something that you'll want to just think about for yourself. It's a really important question. Okay, so money is valuable because it aids justice, and then this, as I said, this transitions into discussion of justice. And so what justice is then explained to be, this is around 331b. I'm using the Stephanus numbers. That's the margin numbers. So 331b is where this transition to this conversation about justice occurs. Actually, right around C. I'll just quote a little bit, and then I'll talk about this. So Socrates says, in response to Cephalus, who just said that wealth makes us just. Socrates says, "A fine statement, Cephalus. But speaking of that thing itself, justice, are we to say it is simply speaking the truth and paying whatever debts one has incurred?" So Socrates says, so are you saying that in order to be just, all you have to do is repay whatever debts you have? So if you owe something to someone, you repay it, and that's an act of justice. And always, speaking the truth, because it looks like people are owed the truth. So if speaking the truth and repaying debts, is that what justice is? And then here's an interesting point, which helps us to see the intricacies of this question. Or is it sometimes just to do these things and sometimes unjust? I mean, this sort of thing. For example, everyone would surely agree that if a man borrows weapons from a sane friend, and if he goes mad and asks for them back, the friend should not return them, and would not be just if he did. Nor should anyone be willing to tell the whole truth to someone in such a state. And so what you get Socrates proposing is, there's this funny thing about justice or morality. if it's about repaying debts and telling the truth, it might turn out that in given situations, that's not what we think one ought to do. If you borrow, the example he uses, if you borrow weapons from someone, and then all of a sudden this person just snaps and they get severely angry, and you hear them talking about, oh, I'm going to kill this person. This person, pissed me off. I need to get back at them. Where's my gun? I want my gun back. You borrowed my gun yesterday. I want it back right now. What Socrates is suggesting is, or asking is, do you think it would be just to give the gun back to your friend in that state? And he thinks it's sort of an intuitive, obvious answer. No, it would not be just to do that, nor would it be just to even tell the truth to them in that state. So if they asked you where the gun was in such a state, Socrates seems to be suggesting it would not be good for them to know. Knowing, this is sort of a controversial claim. It's interesting to think about this. Knowing, which is to say the truth, is at the service of, or it's in some ways secondary to goodness, to what's good. So it would not be good for this person to know where the gun was, given the state that they're in. And so he would say it would not be just to tell them the truth, which is a kind of a fascinating thing to think about. And so the whole point of this, though, don't worry about the details if this doesn't make, the details don't make so much sense. The whole point of this is to get you slowly working towards this position where you can start to question the value or the purpose of justice, or you could say of even what justice is. And so the way this happens is you get this definition. Here's what justice is. It's repaying debts. And then you have this counterexample. And what that causes you to do is it causes you to have to rethink in a deeper, more concise way what you had initially thought justice to be. And this is a very valuable thing to happen, is when you say, this is what's true. It's important to think about what's known as like counterexamples or possible complications that would cause you to have to revise and to then say, oh, that's not entirely wrong, but it's an oversimplification. Actually, here's a better, more careful account of what justice is. So the whole dialogue is sort of priming the engine. It's getting us in that direction so that we have an ability to think a little bit deeper about what's involved with justice, and therefore allows us to question what's the value, the real purpose, the real goal of justice. Okay, so it doesn't seem to simply be the repayment of goods. At one point, it's proposed that justice is doing good to your friends, benefiting your friends, and harming your enemies. So the just thing, the good thing to do, is to benefit your friends and to harm your enemies. So your actions are going to be determined by, is this person a friend of you or are they not a friend of you? Are they on your side or are they not on your side? Do they've got your back or do they not? And so your actions are going to be based on friendship in that way. And so whether an action is just or not is going to be based ultimately on whether the person's a friend or not. It seems fairly reasonable, fairly intuitive, but the wrinkle in this suggestion, once again, Socrates raises, is that we can be mistaken about who a friend is, or even whether someone is a friend. Right? So two people, maybe you've been in situations or relationships like this, where you think this person is your friend, and you even say they're your friend, and you even kind of think they're your friend. But it just so happens that every time you're around them, like all sorts of stuff happens that makes your life worse. This person overcomplicates your life. They sort of make you less happy, even though there's other ways in which they make you happy that you might find it enjoyable being around them. But on the grand scheme of things, your life just gets more complicated because of this person. And that would be a situation where you have to stop and ask, is this person an actual friend? Now, of course, I think they are because I like spending time with them, but are they actually good for me? Do they actually want what's good for me? And that's the question Socrates is asking, is if justice is doing good to our friends and harming our enemies, then we first and foremost need to know who actually is a friend and who's not, because it could turn out that if we're wrong about who's a friend, we could actually be, benefiting an enemy, which would be detrimental to our own well-being, to our own good. So it could turn out that if justice were simply doing good to whoever you think is your friend, then it would be possible for justice to bring about the destruction of your well-being, the destruction of your happiness, right? So, and it seems like justice, by definition, is something that ought to aid your happiness. It's not possible for it to not make you happy. So it seems, and so justice can't simply be doing good to whoever you think is a friend. If there's anything to this suggestion, it would have to be doing good to whoever actually is your friend. But that would require that you know who is your friend and who's not. But how do you know who's an actual friend of yours and who's not? Well, you would need to know, does this person actually do good to my life? Are they actually good for my life or not? Which means you would need to know what is good, what's good for you, what's good for your life. And so this is where we sort of ultimately get to this end of the I don't know if you want to call it this stage of the conversation, where the push to why is justice valuable? Why do we care about justice? Is going to turn on within the context of, say, friendship. It's going to turn on knowing how something makes your life better, right? Is it good to do X? Is it good to go to college? Is it good to run every day? Is it good to eat salad? Right? The way you answer those questions is by knowing whether those things, when you fit them into your life, do they actually make your life better? Do they make your life more fulfilled? And so then what you have is justice is at the service of the good, of what's actually good, not what's merely apparently good, what seems good to you, but what's actually good. And it could turn out that if you don't know what's actually good for you, then you could spend your life in pursuit of things that you think are good that in reality destroy you. And this is what a lot of people end up doing. They spend a lot of their time, their free time, their leisure time doing things that make them worse, make them less happy. I think I recall reading this study once about the use of social media to make you feel less lonesome, and it turns out that what this can do, what social media can do, is actually make you feel more lonesome. which then gets you in this cycle of having to like spend more time or wanting to spend more time on social media, because once you leave it, you feel even more lonely because you have higher expectations, and now you're, even further from what you desired, which was, say, real relationships. And so you could think of it along those lines, where you spend much of your efforts in pursuit of something which is counterproductive. It actually makes you less fulfilled, less happy. And so the way that you would fix that is by coming to see or coming to know what really is good for your life and what's not. That's not something that can just come easily, right? You can't just, like in a very surface level way, know whether someone's a friend. Just as you if you asked a child what's good to eat, and they said, "Oh, those chocolate chip cookies and those donuts and that orange soda," in a certain sense, those are good, but in another sense, those are really bad for you. You wouldn't want to eat those around the clock, because you would not live a happy life if you only ate those sorts of things. The thing about children is that they have a difficult time being able to stop and say, I think these things are good for me, but are they really good for me? They just go with their initial impression of, because I think they're good, they must be so. But that is a very bad assumption to make. It's what leads us to most of the downfalls in our life. And I think what Plato is drawing out in the Republic is this is the way most adults are, not just children. Most adults live like children in that they think something seems good, right? This is apparently good for me, therefore it must be good for me. And so they make their decisions based on what seems to be good without any reflection or any questioning about whether they're actually good. And when you do that, you now become susceptible to becoming a slave to whatever that thing is. And so this is a way of losing control of your life, losing control of your own authority over your life. You can become a slave to donuts. You think they're good for you, and so you find yourself eating donuts every morning, and then you find yourself having to eat them every morning. And whenever you don't eat donuts, you feel like you want to. Donuts have now controlled you. The same thing can go for alcohol. The same thing can go for drugs, other drugs. This is just the way of human life. The things that we think are good for us can turn out to actually be very detrimental to our well-being. And so if you're a, quote, strong person, meaning you have a lot of money, or you have a lot of force or authority or control, like if you're a sophist, and you can convince people of anything you want to convince them of, but you completely lack any understanding of what's actually good, then it turns out that you could be persuading everyone, think like I do, but in reality, the way you think is really bad for you. And so by persuading everyone to think like the way you do, could actually be to your own detriment. Another way of putting it in a sort of a more simple way is that the tyrant can be his own downfall. The tyrant can be the one who makes himself removed from being a tyrant through his own actions, right? So the necessity of knowing what's good in reality versus what only seems to be good upon first glance is essential, according to Socrates, for knowing what would fulfill us as human beings. And so I want to finish by making one last point, which is that, and it's in Greek Greek culture. There was this notion of a craft. We still have it, but we don't really have the language. A craft, which is like an activity that has a particular end. There's a goal, and it's whether you're good at this craft is determined by this whether or not your actions attain this goal. So you can think of it as a couple examples. A mason, that is someone who like lays bricks. That's a type of craft. There is an objective goal that the mason is trying to obtain or trying to realize. The mason sees himself at the service of this goal, such that if they mix the mortar incorrectly, so that once they start laying the bricks, all the mortar crumbles and all the bricks start falling out, you would just say they're a lousy craftsman. They're a lousy mason. They're bad. They're a bad mason. Not perhaps a bad human being full stop, but they are a bad mason. And that's because their actions have not obtained or attained the goal that they were aiming at. Same thing with other crafts that produce various goods like that. The other example used in Plato is the shoemaker, the cobbler, the person who makes shoes. You could also perhaps think of the musician who is trying to attain some goal through their actions, and you're a bad musician if you can't do that. And there might be various reasons why you can't do it, but it takes a lot of practice, it takes a lot of training, and it takes a lot of skill. And what I mean by skill is skill that comes about through habit, through forming various habits, not just ways of acting. Like if you're like a percussionist, you form these various habits of like how to hold the drumsticks and how to move your arms. But it's various habits of ways of thinking and ways of feeling and ways of desiring. And you might even just say more generically ways of being. So if you've ever played an instrument and you've gotten kind of far, you realize that when you're playing, it's hard to describe to someone exactly what's going on in your head because you're not really thinking of the music. You're just or you're not thinking of the music like the particular notes. What note should I play? You're kind of just it's hard. Once again, it's hard to describe. Like you're feeling the music, and you can kind of almost hear it before you play it, and you're trying to just, you're trying to manifest this way of of just thinking, and you're manifesting it through your instrument, and that's not something that can come easily. That's not something that just happens overnight. You can't buy that skill with money, right? You don't become a good musician if you have a lot of money. You don't become a good mason if you have a lot of money. Nor do you become a good musician if you are old. Nor if the majority says, this person's a good mason. It doesn't make them a good mason. It's just the fact that the majority is mistaken about what a good mason is. Same thing could go for music. If you have a lot of money, it doesn't mean you're a good musician. That's like the example like I referred to in the last podcast about the emperor's new clothes. It's like the person who thinks just because I have a whole lot of money doesn't mean that I am automatically good, right? So the majority also don't dictate or determine whether someone is a good musician. Now, a lot of people might think that that's the case. But I think what Socrates is trying to point out is the majority would just be wrong about what is a good musical piece. There's various facts about math the majority can't say, oh, this person's a good mathematician, even if they get all the answers wrong. There's this objective sort of external standard that the mathematician has to measure up to. And if they measure up to that standard well, meaning they know how to perform all these different equations and all that sort of fancy smart stuff, then you would say they're a good mathematician. And if they can't, then we'd say they're not a good mathematician. But it's not the majority that determines whether they're good. It's not the amount of money they have that determines whether they're good. It's something about the standard which is objective. And so what justice is, and this is what we're going to pick this up next podcast, what justice is it's the virtue, it's the skill, the habits, if you wanted to think of it that way, which dispose us towards this objective standard of what's good for a human being. So just as you could say there's this objective standard which the musician is striving for, and there's various virtues that they need to have if they're going to obtain that external objective standard. They have to be good listeners. They have to be able to think on their feet and hear different harmonies and be able to intuit where chord progressions are going to occur, and okay, are we doing a key change or are we not? And you can kind of have all these different habits of being a musician, which would be all the virtues that would be needed in order to obtain that objective standard. Likewise, for just living a human life, there is a set of virtues that would be needed in order to realize that. So you could think of what the human is doing as trying to make something out of themselves. Just as the musician is trying to make something out of sounds, the mason is trying to make something out of bricks. The human being, through our actions, we're trying to make something out of our own lives. We're trying to make our lives good. The mason's trying to make bricks good. The musician's trying to make sounds good or harmonious. The human being is trying to make their life harmonious, but in an analogical way. And so justice ultimately is going to be this virtue which is necessary for the craft of human living, human action. Okay, so that's important to keep in mind. And so justice is always going to serve the good of the human being, just as the virtues of music always serve the good of music. The virtues of a mason always serve the good of bricklaying. The virtues of human living, specifically justice, are going to serve the good of the human being, which is to say they're always going to make you happy. Now this is going to be questioned, as we'll see, by Thrasymachus, but it seems like what Socrates is proposing is that this is the value of justice, is that it just makes us good, just as the value of the mason's virtues is that it makes the mason good. Okay, so that's the basic idea. It's going to get developed over and over throughout the next couple books, but for now, this is probably a good place to end. We'll pick up next time. We'll finish book 1. I want to record another little podcast just discussing some of the stuff at the very end about justice and the role it plays in unifying the many, because it's about harmonizing the many passions that we have, just as you could think of the musician as trying to harmonize the many different sounds. They're trying to bring the many different sounds into a single harmonious whole. The human being who's just is able to bring all these different emotions and passions and desires into a one harmonious whole that actually aims towards what's good for us. So we're gonna look at that next time.